The mahogany-paneled office of Whitaker & Sons, attorneys at law, felt suffocating as 8 of us sat in anticipation. Rain pattered against leaded glass windows, providing an appropriate soundtrack to what was about to become the most humiliating day of my life, followed, unexpectedly, by the most vindicating. I'm Elliot Blackwood, middle son of the late Victor Blackwood, real estate magnate and ruthless businessman. Victor died 2 weeks ago at 78, leaving behind an estate valued at $60 million. 3 ex-wives, 4 children, and a reputation for meticulous control that extended beyond the grave. "Thank you all for coming," Harold Whitaker said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. At 72, he'd been my father's attorney for over 40 years, privy to every deal, every divorce, and now, every posthumous decision. I glanced around at the assembled family. My older half-brother, Richard, sat with perfect posture, his Italian suit impeccable. At 45, he'd worked alongside our father for 20 years, positioning himself as the natural heir to the Blackwood empire. Beside him, his mother Elaine, my father's first wife, maintained the dignified appearance of a woman who still considered herself the true Mrs. Blackwood. My mother, Diane, the second wife, had declined to attend. Across from me sat my younger half-sister Margot, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. At 26, she'd made a career of being Victor Blackwood's only daughter, leveraging his connections to build her lifestyle brand. Next to her, Claudia, my father's third and final wife, 30 years his junior, dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Rounding out the gathering was my younger half-brother, Trent, 31 and perpetually unemployed despite his Wharton MBA, and Vincent Torres, my father's personal assistant for the past 15 years. I shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of my worn blazer. At 36, I was the only Blackwood who had rejected the family business, choosing instead to become a history professor at a small liberal arts college in Vermont. "Before I begin," Whitaker continued, "Victor was explicit that all named parties must be present for this reading, or they forfeit their portion entirely." He glanced at his gold pocket watch. We appear to be missing one individual. As if on cue, the office door opened. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Catherine Blackwood, my mother's younger sister, and my father's former sister-in-law walked in, shaking rain from her umbrella. "Sorry I'm late," she said confidently. Traffic from the airport was dreadful. Catherine had been persona non grata in the Blackwood family for 15 years, ever since rumors of an affair between her and my father had contributed to his divorce from Claudia, a divorce that had mysteriously never finalized. "What is she doing here?" Claudia demanded, her grief instantly replaced by outrage. "Miss Blackwood is named in the will," Whitaker replied simply, gesturing to an empty chair. Catherine took the seat beside me, squeezing my arm in silent greeting. Unlike the others, I'd maintained contact with my aunt over the years, appreciating her straight-talking nature and genuine interest in my academic career. "Now then," Whitaker said, opening an expensive leather portfolio, "let us proceed with the last will and testament of Victor James Blackwood." As he began reading, I felt a strange detachment. I harbored no illusions about my inheritance. My decision to pursue academia had been an unforgivable betrayal in my father's eyes. Our last conversation 6 months ago had ended with him calling my career a waste of a Blackwood mind. What I didn't expect was the barely concealed smirks that would soon appear on my siblings' faces, or the mysterious second envelope that would change everything. Whitaker's methodical voice droned through the legal language as he enumerated the initial bequests. Blackwood Tower, the downtown headquarters, along with controlling interest in Blackwood Enterprises, went to Richard. His mother Elaine received the Palm Beach estate and a substantial cash settlement. "To my daughter Margot," Whitaker continued, "I leave the Manhattan penthouse, the property in Aspen, and a trust of $5 million. To be dispersed in annual payments." Margot's thumbs paused over her phone screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face at the trust restrictions. "To my son Trent, I leave my collection of automobiles, the property in St. Bart's, and a matching trust of $5 million, with the stipulation that he assume a position at Blackwood Enterprises under Richard's mentorship." Trent's face fell. The money and cars wouldn't compensate for having to actually work. "To my wife Claudia, I leave the Los Angeles residence, her current jewelry collection, and an annual allowance of $250,000 for the duration of her life, provided she does not remarry. Claudia's outrage was instant. Allowance? What about the Blackwood Foundation? I've been running the charitable arm for years. Whitaker ignored her outburst. To my former sister-in-law, Catherine Blackwood, I leave my personal art collection, currently valued at approximately $12 million, and the property in Barcelona where it is housed. The room went deadly silent. $12 million in art, plus international real estate? To Catherine? This is absurd, Richard said, his controlled demeanor slipping. That collection includes pieces acquired during your marriage, Mother. We'll contest this immediately. To Vincent Torres, Whitaker continued, I leave the sum of $1 million in gratitude for 15 years of loyal service, and my collection of first edition books. Vincent nodded slightly, his expression professional, despite the substantial bequest. Then Whitaker turned to me, his expression carefully neutral. To my son, Elliot Blackwood, I leave my personal journals and correspondence, currently stored in the Blackwood archives. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for more. There was nothing else. Papers. He'd left me papers. A small, choked laugh escaped Richard. Margot didn't bother hiding her smirk. Even Trent seemed to take pleasure in my apparent disinheritance. That's it? I heard myself ask. For the standard bequests, yes, Whitaker replied. Your father's journals comprise 30 years of business records, personal observations, and correspondence. He was most insistent they come to you. The humiliation burned worse than I'd anticipated. I'd expected little, but to receive only papers while everyone else received substantial assets? The message was clear. This was my father's final judgment on my life choices. How appropriate, Richard said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. The academic gets the books. Victor always said Elliot was the disappointment of the family, Claudia added, her tone falsely sympathetic. I felt Catherine's hand on my arm again, steadying me. Let's reserve judgment until Harold is finished, she said calmly. Victor was nothing if not strategic. Whitaker cleared his throat. As Ms. Blackwood suggests, there is more. He reached into his portfolio and removed a sealed envelope, placing it carefully on the desk. Victor left specific instructions that this envelope be opened only after the standard will has been read, and only in the presence of all named parties. The atmosphere shifted subtly. My father had been a master of unexpected power moves in business. Death hadn't changed his methods. Before I open this, Whitaker said, his hand resting on the envelope, I am required to inform you that it contains codicils and conditions that may significantly alter the bequests I have just outlined. Richard straightened. What sort of conditions? That would be revealed in the contents of the envelope, Whitaker replied, reaching for a silver letter opener. Shall we proceed? As he sliced open the envelope, I noticed Catherine's expression, not surprised or concerned, but expectant. Somehow, she knew what was coming. And judging by her slight smile, the second act of my father's posthumous drama was about to turn the tables on those who had been so quick to laugh at my expense. This document, Whitaker began after scanning the contents, outlines conditional terms for all previously stated bequests. Executed 6 months ago, these conditions must be completed within 1 year of this reading. Failure to complete the assigned task will result in forfeiture of the inheritance. This is ridiculous, Claudia protested. Victor can't possibly enforce conditions from the grave. Actually, Mrs. Blackwood, he can, Whitaker replied. Conditional bequests are perfectly legal, provided they don't require illegal activity or impose unreasonable constraints. What kind of task are we talking about? Margot asked, finally putting her phone down completely. For Richard Blackwood to receive controlling interest in Blackwood Enterprises, you must successfully negotiate the acquisition of Hartman Development Corporation, a transaction your father began but did not complete. Richard's expression remained controlled, but I noticed a slight twitch in his jaw. Hartman Development had been my father's White Whala family-owned company he'd tried to acquire for years without success. For Margot Blackwood, you must establish and personally manage a functional nonprofit addressing literacy in underserved communities. Margot's composure cracked. A charity? I don't know the first thing about literacy programs. For Trent Blackwood, you must successfully complete 1 full year of employment at Blackwood Enterprises, with performance reviews meeting or exceeding standard metrics. Trent slumped in his chair. A whole year? With quarterly reviews? That's cruel, even for Dad. For Claudia Blackwood, you must relinquish your position at the Blackwood Foundation immediately and complete a certified course in philanthropic management. Claudia's face flushed with anger. He's forcing me out of my own foundation? For Catherine Blackwood, you must agree to serve as interim director of the Blackwood Foundation for a minimum of 1 year, implementing restructuring as outlined in the accompanying memorandum. Catherine nodded, unsurprised. This explained her presence and why she'd seemed to anticipate the second envelope. And for Vincent Torres, your bequest requires only that you agree to serve as executor of these conditions, reporting directly to me on each heir's progress. Vincent straightened. I understand and accept, he said simply. Then all eyes turned to me as Whitaker prepared to announce my condition. What meaningless task would my father demand for his papers? Finally, Whitaker said, for Elliot Blackwood. The room stilled. After the substantial conditions placed on my siblings, I braced myself for whatever hoop my father intended me to jump through. In addition to the personal journals and correspondence already bequeathed, Whitaker read, Elliot Blackwood will receive 51% ownership of the Blackwood Foundation, effective immediately. Along with the Greenwich estate and a trust of $20 million, the shock that rippled through the room was physical. Richard half rose from his chair. Claudia made a strangled sound. Margot dropped her phone. What? I managed, certain I'd misheard. The foundation? Claudia's voice rose to a near shriek. He's giving the foundation to Elliot? And the Greenwich house? That's our primary residence. Which is? Richard demanded, his composure fully shattered. What possible condition justifies this absurd redistribution? Whitaker met my eyes directly. Elliot must assume immediate leadership of the Blackwood Foundation, implement the strategic plan outlined, and complete and publish the biography of Victor Blackwood that he proposed 6 months ago, using the journals as primary sources. The biography. The project my father had flatly rejected when I'd proposed it during our last meeting, dismissing it as academic vanity and a waste of time. He'd told me my access to family archives was revoked and that I should stick to teaching other people's histories. Yet here he was, posthumously commissioning that very project and tying it to an inheritance that dwarfed most of my siblings' bequests. This is outrageous, Richard snapped. Elliot has no experience running a foundation. He's not even part of the company. This is clearly a mistake. No mistake, Whitaker replied calmly. Your father was most explicit. The instructions for the foundation's restructuring specifically require Dr. Blackwood's historical expertise and academic background. The use of my title Dr. Blackwood felt like a deliberate choice, underscoring qualifications my family had always dismissed. I don't understand, I said. 6 months ago, he rejected this project completely. Why would he build this into his will? It was Catherine who answered. Because he read your proposal after you left, Elliot. He kept a copy. We discussed it extensively during his final months. What exactly was your relationship with my father, Catherine? Richard turned on her, his voice dangerous. First the art collection, now this revelation. Victor and I reconnected after his diagnosis, she replied evenly. Our relationship was complicated, but not what you're implying. And if we refuse these conditions entirely? Richard asked, calculating alternative approaches. Then you trigger the immediate implementation of the secondary distribution plan, Whitaker replied. In which case, Blackwood Enterprises would be taken public, with 51% of shares placed in the Blackwood Foundation under Elliot's control, and the remaining assets distributed to various charitable organizations. The color drained from Richard's face. The threat was clear: cooperate with Victor's posthumous game, or watch the family empire dismantled. As the implications settled over the room, I felt strangely disconnected from the scene. My father, who had shown me nothing but disappointment for 15 years, had just handed me significant power over the family legacy, contingent on the very project he'd rejected to my face. Why? I asked simply, addressing anyone who might explain this baffling reversal. Vincent Torres spoke unexpectedly. Your father admired integrity, Dr. Blackwood, even when it conflicted with his wishes. He told me once that you were the only one who ever stood your ground against him without any ulterior motive. Perhaps this is his acknowledgement of that quality. The question remained, what would I find in those records? And why was my father so insistent that I be the one to tell his story? The days following the will reading unfolded in a blur of legal consultations and my own profound disorientation. I took a leave of absence from my teaching position and moved into a hotel near the Blackwood Foundation offices, unwilling to claim the Greenwich estate while Claudia was still in residence. 3 days after the reading, I met Catherine for lunch at a quiet restaurant away from the family's usual haunts. "They've been calling me non-stop," she said, settling into her chair. "Richard, Claudia, even Elaine. Demanding explanations, making veiled threats about contesting the will." "I've been getting similar calls," I admitted. "Plus, a surprise visit from Trent, who suddenly wants to rebuild our brotherly bond." A waiter appeared with water and menus. After he departed, Catherine leaned forward. "Elliot, there's something you need to understand about the foundation. It's not what Claudia has presented it to be. For years, it's been more of a tax shelter and social positioning tool than an actual charitable organization. The restructuring your father outlined, it's substantial. It will ruffle many feathers." This didn't surprise me entirely. I'd always suspected the foundation's glossy annual reports and glamorous fundraisers concealed limited actual impact. "Is that why he put me in charge? Because I'm the only one with no ties to the current structure?" "Partly," Catherine acknowledged. "But there's more. The biography and the foundation restructuring aren't separate conditions, Elliot. They're interconnected." Before she could elaborate, my phone buzzed with a text from Vincent Torres. Asterisk, "Need to speak urgently. Meet at Archive Building at 3 p.m.? Asterisk, after lunch, I took a cab to the nondescript building in Brooklyn that housed the Blackwood Archives, a collection spanning 3 generations. Vincent was waiting outside. "Dr. Blackwood," he greeted me formally. "Thank you for coming on short notice." He led me through security to a basement level I hadn't known existed during my previous research visits, stopping at a secure door at the far end. "This section contains your father's most private records," Vincent explained as he entered a code. "Personal journals, correspondence he didn't want discovered during his lifetime. Business dealings that operated in gray areas of legality." The door clicked open. He was explicit that you should have unrestricted access. I stepped into a room lined with organized shelves of leather-bound journals and document boxes. "Your father began keeping detailed journals in his 30s. The earlier ones are more business-focused, but the later volumes become increasingly personal, especially after his diagnosis." Vincent crossed to a filing cabinet, retrieving a thick folder labeled Project Renaissance and a small leather case. "This contains the original restructuring plan for the foundation, including financial audits that have never been made public." He set the folder on a reading table. "And this is something he wanted you to have personally, not as part of the formal bequest." Inside the case was an antique pocket watch and a handwritten note. Asterisk, "My father gave me this when I made my first million. I should have given it to you when you earned your doctorate. The first Blackwood to do so. A different kind of achievement, but one I failed to properly acknowledge." Asterisk, I stared at the watch, speechless. My father had never acknowledged my academic achievements, had, in fact, dismissed them repeatedly as inferior to business success. "The biography condition wasn't a last-minute addition," Vincent said. "Your father began considering it almost immediately after your proposal, though he didn't tell you. He contacted several prominent publishers to arrange a contract, which is included in these files." "I don't understand," I admitted. "He told me explicitly that the biography was a waste of time. Your father was a complicated man. The idea of surrendering control of his narrative, even to his son, was initially threatening to him. But his illness changed his perspective." After Vincent departed, I sat alone in the archive room, surrounded by the documented life of a father I'd never truly known. The folder labeled Project Renaissance revealed a foundation in serious need of reform: financial discrepancies, questionable grant allocations, and inflated administrative costs. But it was the oldest journal on the shelf that captured my attention, dated the year of my birth. I opened it carefully, finding an entry written the day I was born. Asterisk, "Elliot James Blackwood arrived at 3:17 this morning. When they placed him in my arms, he looked directly at me with an intensity I found unsettling in an infant, as if he were already judging me and finding me wanting. Perhaps that's fitting. I find myself wanting as well, uncertain how to be a father to this new life when I've made such a mess with Richard. I must do better this time." Asterisk, I closed the journal, my hands trembling. In all my 36 years, I had never heard my father express vulnerability or self-doubt. As I prepared to leave, my phone rang with Richard's name on the screen. "I know you're at the archives," he said without preamble. "We need to talk about this Foundation situation. There are aspects of its operations you don't understand." "I'm beginning to understand more than you might think," I replied, glancing at the Project Renaissance folder. "This isn't some historical case study. This is our family legacy. If you proceed with these radical changes, you risk destabilizing everything he built. Or perhaps I'll be implementing exactly what he wanted in his final vision for that legacy." As I left the archive building, I noticed a smaller file that had been beneath the main folder, labeled simply Elliot Personal. Inside was a collection of news clippings, academic journal publications, and reviews of my books, all of my professional accomplishments that my father had publicly ignored, privately preserved in meticulous chronological order. The complexity of the man I was now tasked with biographizing expanded before me. Victor Blackwood, ruthless businessman, controlling father, private supporter of the son whose path he'd openly criticized. 3 weeks into my deep dive through the archives, I established a rhythm: mornings at the Foundation offices, reviewing operations; afternoons in the archives, piecing together my father's history; evenings reading his personal journals chronologically. The portrait emerging was far more nuanced than the stern patriarch I'd known. One morning, I arrived at the Foundation to find Claudia waiting in what was technically now my office. "We need to talk," she said, her usual Polish showing signs of strain. "This restructuring plan is unnecessary and disruptive. The Foundation has been functioning perfectly well under my guidance for 8 years. The Foundation's effectiveness is debatable, Claudia," I replied. "The metrics show minimal actual impact relative to resources expended. Administrative costs are nearly triple the industry standard. Those administrative costs maintain the relationships that keep donations flowing," she countered. She leaned forward, dropping her defensive tone. "Elliot, be reasonable. Richard is willing to be generous if you'll reconsider some of these more radical changes. He mentioned possibly adding a wing to the Greenwich House, doubling your trust fund. Are you attempting to bribe me?" I asked mildly. She flinched. "I'm suggesting a compromise that benefits everyone. Victor may have had this vision during his illness, but he wasn't thinking clearly. Actually, the restructuring plan is remarkably detailed and practical. This isn't a dying man's vague notion. It's a carefully constructed strategic plan that, according to these files, he'd been developing for nearly a year before his death." Claudia's composure faltered as she scanned the document I showed her. "I don't understand. He never discussed any of this with me." "Didn't you? According to his journals, he presented an early version of this plan to you last Christmas. You dismissed it as unnecessary disruption then too." The color drained from her face. "He kept records of our private conversations? My father documented nearly everything. Which brings me to an uncomfortable question, Claudia. What exactly is your relationship with James Hartman of Hartman Development?" Her sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicions. I'd discovered the connection 3 days ago in my father's recent journals, references to private investigator reports documenting Claudia's affair with the very man whose company Richard was now tasked with acquiring. "That's a personal matter," she managed. "It would be, except that it directly intersects with Richard's conditional inheritance." After she left, I called Catherine, who had been helping me navigate the family dynamics. "Claudia just tried to bribe me on Richard's behalf," I told her. "I'm not surprised," Catherine replied. "Richard's been making similar approaches to Foundation board members, trying to build opposition to the restructuring." Later that day at the archives, Vincent handed me a small USB drive. "This wasn't part of the official archive. Your father gave it to me personally, with instructions to pass it to you only if significant opposition to the Foundation restructuring emerged from within the family." "What's on it?" I asked, turning it over. "I don't know the specific contents," Vincent admitted. "He encrypted it, but he called it his nuclear option and seemed confident it would neutralize any serious resistance from Richard or Claudia. The weight of the tiny device seemed disproportionate to its size. Whatever leverage it contained, my father had considered it powerful enough to hold in reserve." Hours later, deep in correspondence from the early 2000s, I discovered something that made the room seem to tilt. A series of letters between my father and Catherine revealed a relationship far more complex than either had acknowledged. Catherine had apparently helped my father through a period of severe depression following his divorce. From my mother, a vulnerability he had hidden from everyone else. More significantly, The letters referenced a major business decision in which Catherine had played a crucial advisory role: the acquisition of Palmer Industries, which had become the cornerstone of Blackwood Enterprises' expansion. The deal that had cemented my father's reputation as a visionary investor had apparently been Catherine's recommendation. That evening, Richard called me directly. "This ends now," he said coldly. "I've consulted with our attorneys. We have multiple grounds to challenge the conditional will and do influence from Catherine, questionable mental capacity, and procedural irregularities. Those challenges will fail," I replied calmly. Harold Whitaker anticipated them all. "Then we'll take a different approach. The biography condition. Our publicist has contacted every major publishing house with information about your conflict of interest. No reputable publisher will touch your manuscript under these circumstances." The calculated ruthlessness of this move was breathtaking. I thought of the USB drive, the nuclear option my father had prepared. I could deploy it now, whatever it contained, and potentially end this conflict immediately. Instead, I made a different choice. "Richard, I'd like to meet with you. Just the two of us, no lawyers. Tomorrow morning, if possible." "Why?" His suspicion was palpable. "Because I think there's a solution here that honors Father's intentions while addressing your legitimate concerns about the business implications." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, surrounded by the documented evidence of my father's lifetime of strategic maneuvering. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, the path he would have chosen, the weapon he had provided. But immersion in his private thoughts had shown me both the effectiveness of his methods and their costs: the isolation, the constant vigilance, the inability to trust. I didn't want that legacy. Tomorrow's meeting would be a turning point, not just in the inheritance situation, but in my understanding of what kind of Blackwood I chose to be. Richard's corner office in Blackwood Tower offered a commanding view of the city skyline. I arrived precisely at 8, refusing to give him the psychological advantage. "You wanted to talk. So talk," he said, not rising from behind his imposing desk. "I've spent 3 weeks immersed in Father's private records," I began. "I've learned a great deal about the Foundation's relationship to Blackwood Enterprises, including the tax advantages and strategic partnerships facilitated through its current structure." This caught his attention. Richard leaned forward slightly, reassessing. "Then you recognize why radical restructuring would be problematic for the company," he said, his tone shifting from dismissive to cautiously optimistic. "I understand the potential business implications," I agreed. "I also understand why Father wanted changes. Both perspectives have validity." I opened my briefcase and removed a folder containing the modified restructuring plan I'd developed. "A phased approach," I explained. "Core reforms implemented over 3 years rather than 1, with quarterly assessment of business impacts. Retention of key relationship-building functions while gradually shifting the overall funding ratio to favor direct program support." Richard scanned the document. "And your role in this?" "I remain as director during the transition, with a newly formed executive committee that includes you as a voting member. Claudia transitions to emeritus status with a ceremonial role." "And the biography condition?" he asked. "Proceeds as required, but with a review process that gives you and the family opportunity to respond to any potentially sensitive revelations before publication. Not veto power, but a right to provide context." Richard set the proposal aside, studying me. "Why the sudden willingness to compromise? The Foundation needs reform, but scorched earth tactics on either side will damage the very things Father valued most: the company's stability and the family's public standing." He leaned back, reassessing me. "Father always said you lacked business instinct, that your academic approach made you unsuited for the real world." "He was wrong about many things," I replied evenly, "including you." This caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "His journals reveal he thought you were too rigid, too focused on preserving existing structures rather than innovating. He worried you'd maintain the company perfectly but never evolve it." I met his gaze directly. "He was wrong about that too. You're more adaptable than he gave you credit for." Richard was silent for a long moment. "I'll need to review this proposal thoroughly," he finally said. "Take whatever time you need. My offer stands regardless of your approach to challenging the will. I believe this solution better serves everyone's interests." As I reached the door, Richard called after me. "Why are you doing this? You hold the stronger position legally." "Father made sure of that." I considered my answer carefully. Because I've spent 3 weeks reading the private thoughts of a man who approached every relationship as a zero-sum game, who won countless battles but seemed perpetually unsatisfied with the victories. I'm interested in a different outcome. Later that day, I met with Catherine, who was curious about the outcome. You offered a compromise, she stated, reading my expression. Without using the leverage Victor provided, I nodded, showing her the modified plan. It accomplishes the core objectives while allowing Richard to save face. You know, you could have won outright. The USB drive probably contained something devastating, I acknowledged. Father rarely made empty threats, but using it would perpetuate exactly the dynamic I'm trying to change. 2 weeks later, I received Richard's counter-proposal, accepting most of my framework with adjustments that actually improved the practicality of implementation. His message was brief but significant, a workable solution. Father would be surprised by our cooperation. Perhaps that's not a bad thing. 6 months into my new role as foundation director, I'd finally moved into the Greenwich estate. Catherine helped me settle in, bringing personal items she thought might be meaningful. These were in the Barcelona property, she explained, setting down a box. Things your father kept separate from the main archive. Inside, I found photographs I'd never seen before. Candid family moments from my childhood, my college graduation, even my doctoral hooding ceremony. Events my father had not attended but apparently tracked from a distance. He had these? I asked, stunned by the evidence of attention I'd never suspected. He followed your life more closely than you knew, Catherine confirmed, though his pride prevented him from acknowledging it directly. I've been reading the final journals, I told her, from his last 6 months, and Catherine's hand stilled briefly. They're revelatory. His perspective on family, on legacy, on what constitutes success, it all shifted dramatically as he faced his mortality. I hesitated. He wrote extensively about you, about the role you played in helping him reassess his life. She nodded. Victor in those final months was a very different man from the one you grew up with. More reflective, less certain of the choices he'd made. He also wrote about my mother, about his regrets regarding their marriage and the way it ended. I met Catherine's gaze directly, and about a conversation he had with you last Christmas, where you revealed something that changed his perspective on me completely. Catherine sank into a chair. I wondered when you'd reach that part of the journals. Is it true? Did my mother leave because she was pregnant again? Yes. She was in her first trimester when she left your father. She didn't tell him, didn't tell anyone except me. And the pregnancy? She lost the baby a few weeks after leaving, Catherine confirmed. The stress of the separation, perhaps. She was devastated. It was part of why she moved away, started fresh in California, and you never told my father until last year. It wasn't my secret to share, she replied simply. Your mother asked me to keep her confidence, and I did. Until he was dying and seeking reconciliation with the past. So, the restructured will, the foundation changes, the biography commission all were prompted by this disclosure? Not entirely, Catherine qualified. Victor had already been reassessing many things. But learning about the lost child gave particular urgency to his desire to correct past mistakes, especially regarding you. Me? Why me specifically? Because in his mind, you were the child who remained despite his failures, the one who had the courage to forge your own path despite his disapproval. There's something else, I said, remembering a puzzling entry. He mentioned a letter he wrote to me but never sent. Do you know anything about that? Catherine's expression suggested she did. Check the desk drawer. The right side, bottom drawer. There's a false bottom. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive hand. The letter inside read, ** Elliot, **. By the time you read this, I will be gone. If Catherine has followed my instructions, you'll have already begun the process of understanding the legacy I've left you, both the material inheritance and the more complex bequest of truth. **. What I need you to know is this: of all my children, you are the one I have most misunderstood and, paradoxically, the one who most clearly carries forward what is best in the Blackwood legacy. Not the financial empire or the social position, but the original qualities that allowed our family to rise from obscurity: intellectual rigor, ethical clarity, and the courage to stand apart when necessary. I opposed your choices because they reflected what I had sacrificed in myself: the capacity to value knowledge and principle above power and position. In rejecting the path I laid out for you, you reclaimed something I had lost decades ago. Asterisk. Asterisk, the biography condition is not merely a task to unlock your inheritance. It is my attempt to be known, finally and truthfully, by the one child capable of seeing me clearly, with all my contradictions and failures. Asterisk, asterisk, I am proud of you, Elliot. Not despite your choices, but because of them. Asterisk, asterisk, your father. Asterisk, asterisk, Victor, asterisk. I reread the letter twice, then handed it silently to Catherine. As she read, tears formed in her eyes. He never could say these things directly, she said finally. Even at the end, he had to create this elaborate posthumous mechanism to communicate what most people would simply tell their children face to face. 1 year after the reading of his will, the biography of Victor Blackwood was published. Titled, The Cost of Control, The Life and Legacy of Victor Blackwood, it received critical acclaim for its nuanced portrayal of a complex businessman whose drive for success had shaped both an industry and a family. At the private launch event, hosted at the restructured Blackwood Foundation's headquarters, the family gathered not as reluctant participants in a posthumous obligation, but as genuinely engaged stakeholders in a shared legacy. Richard, now working collaboratively with me on foundation governance, brought potential corporate partners. Margot proudly introduced literacy program graduates. Trent, recently promoted at Blackwood Enterprises, discussed potential synergies between the company and foundation. Even my mother attended, her first participation in a Blackwood family event since her divorce. Her conversation with Catherine had evolved into a warm friendship based on mutual understanding of the man who had shaped both their lives. As the formal presentation concluded, Harold Whitaker approached me. "Your father would be pleased," he observed, though perhaps surprised by how harmoniously it's all unfolded. He anticipated more resistance, more conflict. He expected everyone to approach the situation as he would have, I replied, with strategies and countermoves, winners and losers. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found myself alone in my office with the USB drive that had remained unused in my safe for the past year. Whatever leverage it contained, whatever nuclear option my father had prepared, had proven unnecessary in the end. I placed the drive in an envelope, sealed it, and locked it in my desk drawer. Perhaps someday curiosity would compel me to discover its contents. But for now, leaving it unopened seemed the most fitting conclusion to the year of transformation his conditional inheritance had initiated. The following morning, I convened the first meeting of the Foundation's expanded board, now including Richard, Catherine, two respected nonprofit leaders, and a renowned economist. As we reviewed the impact metrics of our first year of restructured operations, I felt satisfaction that transcended mere compliance with my father's conditions. "We've implemented all the changes outlined in the restructuring plan," I noted. "The question now is, where do we go from here?" Richard, who had initially opposed every aspect of the restructuring, was the first to respond. "The results speak for themselves. I propose we expand the education initiatives into 3 additional cities next year." As the discussion continued, building on successes rather than debating basic direction, I reflected on how thoroughly my father's posthumous intervention had transformed not just the foundation, but our family dynamics. The conditions that had initially seemed like controlling manipulation from beyond the grave had created space for each of us to discover capabilities we might never have recognized otherwise. The laughter that had greeted my apparent disinheritance a year ago had faded into distant memory, replaced by relationships built on mutual respect and collaborative purpose. The second envelope that appeared on Whitaker's desk that day hadn't just changed my financial circumstances. It had created the conditions for a different kind of wealth altogether. 5 years later, the Blackwood Foundation is recognized as a leader in effective philanthropy. Richard continues to lead Blackwood Enterprises with remarkable success, though he now measures that success differently. Margot's literacy program has expanded nationally, and Trent has found his niche developing sustainable technology investments for the company. The Greenwich Estate, once a showcase of Blackwood wealth and status, now hosts regular family gatherings characterized by genuine connection rather than obligation. The laughter heard there is authentic, not the hollow sound of those who once delighted in another's disappointment. As for me, I divide my time between foundation leadership and academic work. The biography of my father has become required reading in business school courses on family enterprise and corporate ethics. The USB drive remains sealed in my desk drawer, a reminder of a path not taken and a strategy never deployed. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. Family wealth, whether measured in dollars, property, or influence, carries complex legacies that extend far beyond financial statements. When facing your own family inheritance, consider what lies beneath the material assets. What values? What unspoken expectations? What potential for healing might be hidden in what's being passed down? The true worth of what we receive from previous generations often isn't apparent at first glance. Sometimes, what initially seems like nothing papers, memories, uncomfortable truths contains the most valuable inheritance of all. The opportunity to understand our past and choose a different path forward.